at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The things we do that you don't have to, the sacrifices we make, like having to listen to Serpent and Fredo have a conversation about public policy. The interesting thing about this, and we want to get one Raging Cajun to decipher another one, so we'll have Scott McKay here shortly. But Serpent I'm talking about James Carville, of course. Yeah. Serpent and Fredo on Fredo's podcast. The interesting thing about what Serpent says here is he was critical of Kamala Harris's campaign as being tone deaf. And yet he turns around, and this also tells you how lost the left is, running around, bumping into each other, groping in the dark, trying to figure out how they can sell their manure-smelling air freshener. So on the one hand, he's critical of the tone deafness of the radical positions on cultural issues. On the other hand, he gives in and perpetuates the same over-the-top Chicken Little rhetoric as you would expect from a fake eyelashes spice, Jasmine Crockett. Take a listen.
We have a president who is siding with Belarus and North Korea and Russia. I'm sorry, that's a crisis. We have a president that has appointed some of the most incompetent people you can imagine to the United States Congress. We have a president who is starting a trade war with our three biggest trading partners, and we're watching the beginnings of which could be a financial meltdown that we can hardly imagine. We have a president that does not respect our institutions, does not respect the limited powers, the separation of powers that we have in our Constitution. I can think of no bigger crisis this country's been in my lifetime, ever. I think we've had presidents that have made mistakes, the Iraq War being one, which I'm happy to say I've been opposed. But I thought that they did it because they thought it would work. They didn't do it because they thought it would hurt the United States. I think they were wrong. I am not convinced at all that Donald Trump loves the United States. I'm pretty convinced he doesn't love the idea of the United States. That he's pretty clear on that.
Yes, we're in a period that represents the greatest threat to the constitutional republic in James Carville's lifetime, and he doesn't believe in the idea of America, and he's the Manchurian candidate. Really? A decade into this, and you're back to Putin's man in D.C., Manchurian candidate conspiracy theories? It just shows you how lost they are. Scott McKay publishes The Hayride, senior editor at The American Spectator, author of Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, as well as King of the Jungle. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, happy Friday to you.
All right. So, again, you're a Raging Cajun. Jimmy's a Raging Cajun. Decipher.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say I don't claim this guy. Second of all, I'm listening to you playing the clip, and what pops in my head is low T. Like, this guy needs to take some supplements.
Well, he is like 80.
Because, I get it. And so it's clear that he needs it because, this is the kind of stuff that people who have no control over their own lives would be saying. And some of this, you can tell, is Carville attempting to make himself relevant by saying outrageous things. Because he's not relevant anymore. Nobody lets James Carville run their campaign.
Yeah,
he doesn't have the ability to do it anyway at 80 years old. But he also doesn't have the ability to retire gracefully. I don't know if he's got a gambling problem and he doesn't put any money away. I have no idea why. He doesn't just kind of go away. But he has zero cachet here in Louisiana anymore because he has essentially alienated 60-something% of the registered Democrats in Louisiana are black, and he's alienated the blacks like there's no tomorrow already. And so, he doesn't have really any political relevance back home, and now he's trying to be relevant doing, like Chris Cuomo podcasts and his own podcast that nobody watches, other than, people like us will go and grab clips from the most outrageous things he says and talk about it to make fun of him. This is Carville and this is what he is, but you're exactly right in that he's over there saying this stuff, and there's not a lot of better analysis within the Democrat Party right now. Like, they really are groping around in the dark for, some way to be politically relevant, and the only thing that they can all agree on is how much they hate Trump.
Right.
And this, so in other words, there's no sanction on the left for stuff like what just came out of Carville's mouth, from kind of cooler heads saying, guys, the American public's not going to be persuaded by this. Stop saying it. We've got to come up with better ideas rather than just trying to make Trump into Hitler or whatever else it is that we're trying to say. Like, they can't do any better than that because they can't agree on any of it. To sit here and say that Kamala Harris's campaign was bad and Kamala Harris was bad. But what was worse than Kamala Harris is the entire Democrat Party. Like, they didn't have anybody better than her. That's why they settled on her. And when they gave her an opportunity to pick a VP candidate, it's jazz hands walls, right? and the guy that most of us look at and say, well, we would have been a little bit nervous about Shapiro. Mm-hmm. There's no support for Shapiro in the Democrat Party. The last test ballot for 2028 I saw, he's getting 3%. AOC's getting 6%.
Yeah, but why do you think that is? Is it because he's Jewish? I mean, honest, let's have that conversation.
Absolutely, yes. I think.
Well, and a lot of people just don't know who he is.
Anti-Semitic party.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that aspect of it, but there's just a lot of people don't know who any of these people are, frankly. I mean, did they know who Tim Walz was before he was plucked out of obscurity? No. I mean, so Josh Shapiro doesn't have a national profile yet. But the interesting thing that you're pointing out now, so just thinking about this and these sort of competing approaches. So on the one hand, you have like our governor Pritzker, essentially taking the Carville approach, and he thinks that the path to the nomination in 28 is to be the most outlandish, the most reckless critic of Trump and do everything 180 degrees different than Trump is doing it. On the other hand, you have Governor Patrick Bateman there in California doing this podcast where he's yucking it up with conservatives, trying to and he's just like, we have to do better with vote counting. It shouldn't take us 4 weeks when it takes Argentina 4 hours, and you're right about that. And let me understand the trans issue and all this posturing, bull jive posturing he's doing. But at least you see transparently that he thinks he needs to sort of present as post-partisan and able to talk to people with whom he disagrees with. So it's very interesting the different tracks that some of these aspirants to lead their party are taking. Yeah, well, and in Newsom's case, what you kind of come back to is that old line about how hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. Yeah, right? La Rochefoucauld. And it's like, oh, yeah, we need to do better at counting votes because it shouldn't take 4 weeks. It's like, no, it took you 4 weeks to fix the election so you could put Democrats in. Like, who do you think you're fooling, right? Like, Michael Savage, so, like, apparently. Everything he said it falls under that sort of, that ambit. But, you're right. Like, Newsom is looking, somebody's got to be the centrist guy, and I guess it ought to be me. But, in that same poll, like, Kamala was catching 33% and Newsom was catching 7%, right? He was behind Pete Buttigieg.
Well, he didn't speak at the DNC either, and he was ready to go if they needed him, but he didn't even get a Tuesday lunch spot, so that was strange. But Newsom also, he changed his position about boys playing in girls' sports. Did you see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all contrived.
Sincere, no.
Yeah, come on. I mean, but it's less about Newsom and Pritzker and more about what the competing ideas about the identity they need to adopt for the purposes of 26 and 20 and 28. Right. I mean, that's
right.
That's really what's at stake here. It's interesting. Alex Karp, of course, the CEO of Palantir, talking to Charles Payne at Fox Business about sort of the U.S. superiority militarily and how that's been such a force for good over the last 80 years, improving the planet. But something he said, too, just sort of a basic principle about failing organizations, I thought was interesting as another one of these tech bros, Alex Karp I'm talking about, who has, moved towards the center right from the left, as so many have, including that guy who's running Doge. Take a listen to what Karp said, though.
And witness institutions that are failing, whether it's, Europe's failure, the Democratic Party. You can look at all these things. They're failing for very, very simple reasons, which is no one believes the underlying dynamics of what they're saying is going to create more value than what you put into the actual instrument. And that's a very basic business principle, but it's also the principle by which nations survive and thrive or disappear.
And the same thing with political parties that survive and thrive. If you're not, there's no belief that you're going to add value to my life and you're aligned with my interests. This Brahmin problem that the left has, that Rui Teixeira wrote about in Liberal Patriot. Liberal Patriot.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and so this is, and I'm not trying to solve this equation for them because I know it's going to be contrived like Newsom. So I want a two-party system, peaceful, a pluralist system, and all that. I'm not trying to solve it for them, but we are identifying something about what's happening on the left because it should be instructive in terms of what not to do.
Yes, and I think if you haven't read Rui Teixeira's piece on the Brahmin problem the Democrats have, you really should. It I think, very well encapsulates this, which it's funny because Teixeira is on the left.
Yeah.
And he's like the only guy I've seen who correctly diagnoses their problem. But you're right. There is the value proposition of the Democrat Party right now is basically null and void. They've failed in pretty much all of their, key purposes, at least if you're to analyze those as an honest attempt to make lives better for Americans. You now have the American people looking at the record of those things over the last, 20 years and saying, nope, this doesn't work. So let's try something else. And they don't have the ability to say, okay, yeah, here's some other ideas that we can explore. Like, they don't have any other ideas. And like 10, 15 years ago, the Republican Party was in that position. And what came along was Trump, who wasn't a conservative in the, then contemporary sense, but rather more of a radical centrist. And he reoriented the Republican Party towards some things that the elites didn't like and found a whole class of Americans and a whole, across classes, actually, of Americans that were willing to buy in. And it turns out a lot of those things do work better than what the ruling elite that the Democrats had largely captured were pushing. And that's the existential problem that Democrats have right now. And I don't think that James Carville, in his current intellectual state, can grasp those things. And so instead you get this Trump derangement syndrome gone wild that nobody on the left is willing to call him out for.
Yeah, the only thing that they've done is to add a Musk derangement syndrome to Trump derangement syndrome. But it's the same problem, and we in Illinois recognize this very well, at least those who are paying close attention, because we saw the Republican Party do this for the better part of 3 decades, where the entire definition of the Republican Party here was not being House Speaker Mike Madigan, the longest-serving House Speaker in American history, who's now on his way to prison. But it was all defined in the negative. We're not Mike Madigan. He's the boogeyman. That's what they've done for 10 years. They think they got away with it in 2020, so they think it works just to make Trump and now Trump and Musk the boogeymen. But it doesn't work.
Well, and it's like really not going to work with Musk if he brings those astronauts home in 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? You've been demonizing this guy nonstop since the inauguration, or really even before then. And like he's going to be the big American hero who sends up a rocket and brings these folks home. And when they get home, they're like, yeah, we could have been home 6 months ago, but I wouldn't let this happen. I don't know where you go from there with the Elon hate. Like, what are you going to do? And I don't know why they don't recognize the dead end they're heading toward.
Well, let's hope
they just don't have anything else.
Yeah, and let's hope they don't recognize it. I'm fine with them, languishing in a dead end. Let's encourage them to stay there. Scott McKay, publisher of the Hayride, senior editor at the American Spectator, and author of the books Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, as well as King of the Jungle. Scott, thank you as always.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy. Y'all have a great weekend.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
MyPillow is excited to announce that they're having the first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over